Conquer the Noise is a podcast produced by Unconquered, an independent agency challenging brand perspective through redefined content. This podcast is dedicated to telling stories of outstanding ideas and people who have found their way amongst the chatter. This is Jonathan Hansen, your host of Conquer the Noise. Today we are talking with Ryan Lupberger, founder of Cleancult, which is a sustainable cleaning brand that is working to build a better home cleaning system that is sustainable, cost-effective, and one that rethinks safe ingredients, packaging, and performance. Their innovative refill systems use 100% recycling packaging, carbon-neutral shipments, and biodegradable formulas. We're going to talk through his startup journey from conception to the long process of troubleshooting product refinement to where they are now. Ryan, thanks for being on the show. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Really appreciate you making the time.
Yeah, thanks again for having me today. Excited.
So Cleancult, that's I think in my perspective, it's one of the early OG cleaning brands in the D2C space. I would love for you to give a little intro, though, for listeners at home who may not have heard of you yet.
Yep. Yeah. So we are the only company right now in the world that can put soap in a milk carton. And we wanted to completely redefine clean, right? So how our model works is you start with the last bottle of soap you'll ever need. It's a permanent, refillable, beautiful dispenser that lasts forever, right? It's glass, it's really stunning, and hand soap, dish soap, all-purpose cleaner, and liquid laundry. And then instead of using a plastic bottle to refill it, you refill it with a milk carton, which cuts down a ton of plastic waste, right? We use really natural ingredients all made from coconuts. You can actually pronounce them and understand them, and formulas that are really clean, right? In a way that you don't have to become a mad scientist. You just refill it and you're good to go. And our really mission is to bring zero waste to the masses.
Yeah, I think the milk carton idea is pretty brilliant, and would be just in itself a reason for personally for me to buy it, just because I think I get plastic anxiety when I see how much plastic I use and it's in my home, and every day I think I'm making headway, and then I realize I open my fridge and everything inside is plastic, and it's just one of those never-ending battles. So I think that's a really smart innovation there. So you started the brand actually while you were still in college, and I'm curious to how you got there and what that idea was that sparked this whole thing.
Yeah, well, originally, to be very honest, I didn't love cleaning products, right? I was never passionate about cleaning, and dorm rooms, life, apartments. They probably go to show that. But when I was in school, I'm born and raised Boulder, Colorado, right? So always been really natural through and through. Used organic food, organic shampoo, you name it. My parents are frankly pretty much hippies. And when I finally went to school, I was doing laundry, and I looked at the back of my bottle of laundry detergent and didn't see any ingredients listed. Right. And Boulder guy again at heart, it was, why is this? And did all this research, and there's no ingredients that are required to be on cleaning products. And the same in hand soap, the same in dish soap, the same in all-purpose cleaner. And the more research I did, the crazier the industry became, because there's no ingredient regulation, right? So you have the USDA, the FDA, and the EPA. They aggressively regulate food and personal care products, but not cleaning, right? So it was, how has this industry been missed? And the more research I did, there's all these chemicals that are banned overseas that are also allowed here in the US. Almost 1,500 chemicals are banned in the UK. And it was like, wow, this is crazy, right? So then I looked for natural products to use, the Method, Mrs. Meyer, Seven Generations, Baby Organics of the world. And, love the brands. I grew up, frankly, on some of them, but they all use plastic, right? And I kept coming back to the same issue. It was, where is a better for me brand that didn't have all the waste, right? And then on the same side, we looked at brands like Casper and Quip and Harry's and Bombas, and they were really stunning, right? And distributed online. And there wasn't a single brand at the time that was online, right? That was really D2C focused. So we said, basically, could we do this differently? Could we create a brand that used actually natural ingredients that really clean in a way that didn't have all the plastic waste? And that was the impetus of the brand. Yeah, 2016.
So that aha moment was in the laundry room, looking at the back of that, and you just thought opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, so the aha moment was aha every year, right? Every 6 months, every 3 months, right? We did not start, frankly, with a perfect model. So first it was, this is a problem, right? And I've always been in love with social entrepreneurship, right? I work for a company called the Unreasonable Institute. It's one of the largest world social venture accelerators. Fell in love with kind of this better for business movement, but always wanted to find this intersection of a problem that mattered and also a problem that could be solved, right? And I loved consumer goods. I could get my head around it. So I think it was a mix of opportunity and also a really clear problem that I felt like we could actually make a dent in that really mattered. So, we saw that was a problem. That was a big light bulb, but our first model failed. Our second model failed. Our third model failed, right? It really wasn't until 2019 that we have what you see here today. So the last bottle of soap and refills and milk cartons. It's a really beautiful model. So I'd like to think it's been an aha almost every day. That's my personal mission. Yeah.
Well, no, I love that. It also just goes to show that you're always learning, and there's always just constant pursuit of incremental improvement.
Yeah.
And you mentioned failure in the model, and I'm curious to how you handle that. So I think failure is one that prevents people from chasing ideas and going after things in the first place.
Yeah.
But it takes a certain amount of resilience and belief in what you're doing to consistently go back, just to say, all right, this didn't work. Let's go back and reformulate and see what happened. So, I'm curious to hear about some of those failures inside the models itself. You could speak to them specifically to a specific instance, or I would just love to hear how you are sort of managing and working within that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, to start, I have to say, Babson was phenomenal, right? They gave us great resources, but really
Babson's your university, just for people who aren't familiar with it, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. So that's where we started off, and we had a pretty good, just support system there. So that's really important to keep going. It's just a really good support system around you. But honestly, so the first launch of the brand, we put pods in a box, right? And we saw the plastic-free issue, and we said, look, let's do this better. And we launched on Kickstarter. And frankly, out of the 230 customers that were in Kickstarter, 220 were probably friends and family, right? And we shipped all the boxes out, and the pods got so hard in shipment that they became rocks, right? So they didn't work in the laundry. You could literally crack this thing on pavement, right? It was rock solid. It was like, okay, that didn't work. But there was some pretty interesting consumer perceptions of it. It was like, I think there's something real here. Right. So that was a failure, and we lost a ton of money because we didn't calculate the shipping, frankly, costs correctly. Right. And the average order value. So went back to the drawing board. A year later, we launched an Indiegogo. Right. And Indiegogo saying, look, we need a higher average order values here. And it's not just the plastic free issue. It's also the ingredient issue. So we launched hand soap, dish soap, all purpose cleaner, and liquid laundry detergent. Right. All the bottles leaked. So it was like 60-70% leakage in shipment. We didn't get the economics right again. And also people still got issues with plastic, right? So this time with the full product suite, it was only partially zero waste, not fully. And we went back to the drawing board, and it was like, look, this didn't work either. And at this point, frankly, I was starting to sweat because this was almost 2.5 years in, and we hadn't had real traction. We hadn't had real sales, right? Maybe 50 grand of sales up to this point. And there was no traction, right? And it was like, look, I just don't know if this is going to work. And then finally we got to a point, it was this light bulb saying milk cartons, right? And looked at the box waters of the world, and it was like, what if we do this in household cleaning? And, a year and a half later, in pain and tears, trying to get this model to come to life, we launched in Jan 1 of 2019 and had phenomenal traction and really exciting success. So it just took almost 3 or 4 iterations to get to a point of real traction and real scale.
I mean, do you think that the traction is attributed to the actual the changing of the way you're packaging the product, or do you think or is it on the marketing side? I mean, I know that ultimately the experience is what's going to bring people back to shop with you again, right? So I'm curious where it's kind of like chicken or egg in a way.
Yeah. I to your point, I think it's definitely both. I just think that there's such an epidemic of greenwashing and an epidemic of just heavy marketing without the product that delivers, right? So I think to some extent, to be very honest, we didn't feel like we could market in a way that was truthful and scalable and real until 2019, right? So it's honestly, we knew in our guts that the product wasn't there yet, that the brand wasn't there yet, that the distribution wasn't there yet. So it's really a mix of both, right? So we founded the company in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and we can go into that story a little bit. But we had a phenomenal launch video that got over 30 million views about our experience on the island, about our team there. And that really was real marketing, real product, real distribution. in an authentic way that finally resonated and grew us quite quickly in that year one.
Yeah, I definitely want to jump into that story
Yeah.
and talk through your experience in Puerto Rico. But I think this offers an interesting topic because, we're seeing a big generational shift. Millennials are now becoming, a huge part of the markets and are really shaping how brands are producing, marketing, what they're making. And I would definitely say over the last, 10 plus years, we've seen, like, in my opinion, we've seen a shift from like these big legacy brands, let's say like Chevy, Ford, DuPont, where you kind of all had like similar mediocre products, and they really wrapped it around this beautiful package of marketing and brand, and were able to like really sell a dream or sell a lifestyle. And it seems like people have gotten either savvy to that, or now there seems to be more of a focus on actual innovation, actual product use, the experience, whether it's from opening the box to actually in use, and the buying experience. And so you did this talk in 2017, a TED Talk, which I thought was great. And I'll just say the title so listeners at home can look for it. Why Millennials Are Done with Green Brands and Why It Matters. And I think this idea of what I'm mentioning here, as far as speaking to the focus on innovation, ties into your talk a little bit. And I think you even had your own experience in that, and speaking to how you were messaging and what you were focusing on. What did you learn in the beginning when you were talking about your messaging and focusing on sustainability versus your innovative side of the brand?
Yeah. And for us, truly, the thesis and approach hasn't changed, right, in the last 4 years. So really what happened when we started is we prioritized better for you, really better for the world, right? As we said that our products will save the earth, right? And, the general feedback, and it's changed a little bit over the last 3 years, is people say that they want to fix things. People say that they want to do better, buy better, be better. It generally doesn't happen, right? And it still doesn't happen at scale. So we really had to switch our marketing, and that's why the catchy title, right? Why Millennial Done with Green Brands and Why It Matters. It's not that they don't want green brands, is that green brands have to reprioritize product excellence over basically product betterment for the world, right? And this is a really big learning. This is, frankly, the most sustainable way to make cleaner products would be DIY, right, at your house, and you use vinegar and lemon, right, and water, and that'd be the best way. But we knew that not everyone would do that, and we knew that that was not sustainability at scale, right? So when we were building this brand, it was, how do we bring sustainability to the masses? How do we prioritize better formulations and then support it with better packaging, right? So it really has been a big mental shift coming from Boulder to understanding that people say that they're going to change behavior, but in my opinion, rarely do, right? So then how do we make better solutions fit in a way that doesn't require people to change their behavior? And that's really been our mission here, is how do we have our milk cartons right on shelf, right? Right next to the P&Gs of the world? How do we deliver to you and not make you have to mix it yourself, right? It's ready to go. How do we communicate this to you in a way that you already understand, right? So it's not a mental leap. So that's really how we task ourselves to do this every single day.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. It's something I think a lot of entrepreneurs should be listening to, because right now the sustainability greenwashing thing is, it's hard to differentiate what's real, what's not. But I also, speaking on the theme of sustainability, how sustainable is this trend going to be? I mean, I would love it to stick around for a while, but unfortunately, product trends, I just don't see it here forever. So I think, in essence, that approach is what's going to, I think that's a great long play. Is basically what I'm trying to say, and think that's what's going to really help sort of separate the new competitors in the space and with what they're doing against you, and what you're doing long term. Because there's still, I see a lot of messaging that's really around the environmental side of it, and not necessarily around product superiority. And I agree. I think that's a really big distinction.
Yeah, and I think, again, there's always going to be a group of customers that are dark green, we call them, right? So they're going to be looking for the best environmental sustainability, but it's usually about 1%, right? which is not to say those people don't matter. They're important. They are a loud voice. They are going to lead the change amongst products and consumers and retailers. But we're trying to not be for the 1%. We're trying to be for the 99%, right? It's how do we get a model that really makes a difference to everyone in a way that they can consume very, very easily, right? So going back to our competitors, that's where we feel like we differentiate, is instead of being just online, we're in retail. We're price parity with the leading natural brands. It's a little bit easier of a system. It's not a concentrate, right? So that's really our mission, is we all fit into this pie. We're all going to make progress, and it's such a massive industry in household cleaning. But our goal is, how do we do this in a really simple and easy to understand way?
You know, you talked to the customer segmentation. You have sort of this, already alluded to the dark green, which is sort of the diehards, the 1%.
Yep.
I'm curious how else you're segmenting your audience and or at least have your customer profiles. I would love to talk about that if you're comfortable sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that all of these natural brands, right, be it in food, beverage, cleaning, you name it, there is a portion of early adopters, right, that matter. And these are always going to be your either high tech or high natural or very hyper specific people, be it keto or paleo, right, or whatever trend or value prop that you're going for. But we needed to break out of that very, very early on, right? So for us, our market is actually equally focused on conventional cleaning customers. Let's say you use Dawn Dial soft soap, and also the natural cleaning customers, right? Because what we found more and more is that it's very challenging to get someone to switch from a conventional, and when we say conventional, we mean petroleum based, right? So it's about 90% of the market, right? And they're still great products. They work really, really well, but they're not great for the environment, right? So it's very hard to make the transition from conventional to natural, because you have to convince them that, look, my cleaning product is bad for the earth, right? That's one. Then you have to convince them that there's maybe some ingredients that aren't perfect. Then you have to convince them that naturals actually work, which is a huge hurdle. Then you have to convince them that, okay, the price difference is worth it. It's a really big shift, right? And it's why it's taken 30 years for the natural cleaning products to take generally about 5, 7, 10% of the overall cleaning market. But where we're going after is actually conventional, because it's a very easy switch from, let's say, again, a conventional to a zero waste product, because everyone doesn't like plastic, right? No matter where you fall on the political spectrum, you're worried about plastic. You're worried about it being in the oceans, in your lakes, around, let's say, the microplastics with your kids, right? In the different formulations. So this we're seeing, which is so exciting, which is why, again, we're trying to build the best brand for the masses, is it being a much easier switch. And our customer segment is across the spectrum, really, of every nationality, almost every race, every age group. And what's really interesting is it segments almost equally in all of them, which is what we're so excited, frankly, because the zero waste messaging, in my opinion, is just a lot more palatable than the natural messaging.
Yeah, I'm a total sucker for like trying new products. It drives my significant other crazy, because every shipment I'm changing something. I think it's just the constant pursuit of trying to find something that you like, that works, and that also has this good the good side, as you were sort of mentioning. So within that sort of customer spectrum and approach to how you're attracting those customers, and we talked a little bit about that title, as far as how millennials are done with green brands, and also just the idea that behavior doesn't necessarily change, or if it does, it can take a long time to adapt and do that. So how do you address that? Is that, is there an educational side to your work or your marketing that helps sort of tip the scales a little bit, or is it something else?
Yeah, so I think we start with the fact is that people want to do better, right? We all know that, and that was kind of like why the playful title. But the second fact, I think, that we've really taken a long time to learn is people will not do better at scale unless it's very easy. And I know I keep going back to it, but it's what we live and breathe every single day here at Cleancult. So for us, we try to create a model which requires the least amount of education as possible, right? So in direct to consumer, it's a lot of video marketing, it's humor, it's color, it's price. And it just makes sense that you have to show people what it is, right? But the majority of our business will actually be in retail, right? And that's really our bread and butter also from a differentiation perspective, because a lot of the competitors in our space just can't live on a shelf.
Yep.
And where the milk carton has really beautiful brand blocking, and it's alive and really calls out. So our goal is that for a customer 5 feet away from the shelf, no matter what age you are, to understand the model, right? Glass bottle, glass bottle, glass bottle, refill, 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 in all-purpose cleaner, right? And instantaneously you get that, oh, it's a refill, and 2, these go together, right? And I think we're always trying to get better at that, but we're trying to create a really, frankly, a sustainable system that you could go into any Kroger, Whole Foods, CVS, Kohl's, grocery, frankly, and say like, okay, this makes sense. This is a better alternative, and we don't need education. But there's always going to be some, obviously. Yeah.
So, what I find interesting about your story too is just the support you've had from investors. It seems like there's a level of patience there, just going through the different iterations. There's also the experience you had at the accelerator in Puerto Rico. I would love it if you could talk to just how you got tied into the accelerator in Puerto Rico, how that helped your business, and then how that has sort of led on to other investors and grown from there. Yeah.
So, I joke, it's the dark years, right? It was the challenging 3 years, but pre-launch, right? So from 2016 through 2018. And it was some challenging years. So year 1, we did the Babson Venture Accelerator, and it was really trying to figure out what we're doing. And, almost gave up at the end of that year because there wasn't enough traction to keep going, right? Then we actually moved to San Juan, Puerto Rico, and applied to accelerators all across the world, right? Because we couldn't get any investors. The model didn't have enough traction. And this accelerator in San Juan was one of a couple that accepted us, and we fell in love with it. It was good grant funding. It was phenomenal community. It was great investors. So at the time, we really didn't know much about San Juan, right? And we picked up and moved to San Juan, Puerto Rico for a year. And really, again, probably had the most special year I personally have had, and just fell in love with the community. There is over 60% of the world's pharmaceuticals used to be based in Puerto Rico due to a tax policy. And that shifted in the early 2000s because Congress closed some of the tax loopholes there. So a lot of them shifted out, right? So what you're left there with amazing researchers, developers, engineers, universities without as much work as there should be, right? And then at the same time, you had top tier designers, right? So we just fell in love with the talent, the community, the infrastructure, and that really propelled us in 2017. So today, about 35% of our team is still based in San Juan. Our entire design team is there. Our brand director, our brand designers, our copywriters, creatives are there. And that's always been a really big part of our story, right? So that was 2017. 2018, because we still didn't have enough traction, we moved back to Boston partially. We were back and forth between San Juan and Boston. And we joined Mass Challenge, right? And we won Mass Challenge. And it was finally the last accelerator that we needed to get us over the hurdle. And that was when we finally started raising successfully, right? We had this model of bottle and refill. We had a moat, we had a differentiator, we had some pretty healthy grant funding, right, from these different agencies, and finally closed our pre-seed round. And frankly, it all came down to one person, right? Is we struggled fundraising for a year and a half, and it was trying to get angel, and just kept getting no's until Dave Heath, who's a close advisor and investor, the CEO of Bombas, said, let's do this. He opened up his network, and it was really the one credible investor that once he lent his credibility to us, the credibility of the business became real, right? So we closed our pre-seed round, about 3 months thereafter. We continued to raise. We moved up to New York City, and that was kind of the story. And again, now we're back and forth between Puerto Rico and New York pretty much every month.
Yeah. Is there a cost of doing business incentive working out of Puerto Rico? I'm curious to, I think one of the early reasons why just my companies had success is because we didn't want to start with huge overheads of buildings and other structural things or infrastructure that advertising can previously needed. So we saw opportunity there to just start remotely, and it was a big incentive for us. So anything like that for you as far as starting and setting up in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, so there are a bunch of attractive, frankly, tax incentives, but only for
Uh-huh.
profitable. And we're not
Uh-huh.
profitable yet. I think
Uh-huh.
still a couple of years away from that. So for us, what really drew us is the talent, is
Mm-hmm.
the flexibility and the community there.
Mm-hmm.
And also the R&D environment, right? Because there's a
Mm-hmm.
big program in the United States called what's called the SBIR grant from the
Mm-hmm.
National Science Foundation. And they grant hundreds of millions of dollars to research driven startups every year for free. It's just
Mm-hmm.
grant funding, right? And they do it on a state by state basis. In Puerto Rico, obviously, it's included in its territory. And there's not as much research grants there. So we really found a great opportunity to partner with a university on the West Coast, University of Puerto Rico, MIOS, and the national government to get a lot of really interesting grant funding there, as
Mm-hmm.
well as just continue to make Cleancult better. So, I think tax is a less of an attraction for us. It was much more the community, the environment, and frankly, just the talent there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. You don't really hear Puerto Rico on the map as far as like an incubator space, and
Yeah.
I think it's a great way to build economy and community
Agreed.
and employment for people.
Yeah.
And something we should be exploring more. And it definitely got
Yeah.
my interest peaked when
Yeah.
I read through that. So you went through your funding. And it's your partners have grown. I know you have a series of angel investors, and I think one myth of getting investors is that it's overnight success, or it's immediately going to help propel you to growth. And I'm curious to hear how you manage everyone's expectations, especially in the investing world, because I think if you don't have the right investing partners, as you know, they're going to be putting pressure on you when you don't need necessarily additional pressure than you already have. And there's a lot of people to please. So how do you manage all that?
Yeah, well, I will start off to say, we got very lucky, right?
Yeah.
And we just have phenomenal partners. So for some backgrounds, we almost have 130, angels, family offices, and venture funds on our cap table, right? That's far more than most brands. And we did a mix of both intentional and happenstance, right? And I think we have just been thrilled at this model, right? Because if you go the route of having one venture lead, if you have a down year or a down round, you're in a really uncomfortable position, right? Because you only have one party to generate capital, right? That's it. And, we saw that, and frankly, we also failed at fundraising from venture early on. So, it was part choice, part luck, but it was too dangerous for us, right? So in our pre-seed, we had over 30 angels, right? In our seed, we have 25 angels plus a really great firm called Box Group based out of New York, and they're phenomenal partners. In 2020, we had our Series A, right? And that was actually another 40 investors with one lead. Now we're actually just about to close our Series B in similar structure, right? And we obviously have a lot of flexibility now, frankly, on fundraising, but we're continuing to perpetuate this, because you get a lot of heads who can frankly introduce you to retailers, team members, banks, customers, you name it, right? Which is one big benefit. Two, if you ever have challenges, there's a lot of people that want you to succeed, right? And if you have 120 people on the cap table and they each write, $50,000 check, that gets really substantial, right? And if you ever have a really uncomfortable year, that's okay, right? So that's been really big for us. And from a management time, it does take time, right? That's just a reality. But I think what we've done really well is communicated very transparently. So we have bi-monthly, very clear investor updates that try to get ahead of everything, frankly, they ask. And then two, I just think it's setting expectations up front, right? So it's, we are running this. We are obviously the leaders on this team. And we know this space, right? And as important as you are for us, and we're going to hopefully do all very, very well together and support you on this journey, you always have to defer to us, right? And I think that's uncomfortable for some, but I've gotten better at that as we've grown. So, I think for us, it really has been a blessing to have this group. And, I've become personal friends with probably 30 of them. I go out to drinks and know their families. And it's just been a really nice journey, because when we do well, be it an IPO, a SPAC, an exit, or if it's a business that I continue for 20 years, right? And we move to other product categories, they'll do well. And I think it's just so wonderful to see, that, because you can see the real implication of your work in the world, other than obviously the impact side of things. So yeah, it's been really, really beneficial for us.
Yeah. Have you, has that changed your, I guess, attitude or as far as looking at others and helping pay it forward, and just sort of instilling a level of empathy just within the other founders, startups, entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think yes and no, right?
Yeah.
I think that empathy is an important skill to have, but I think it has to be choiceful empathy. And I think you have to be ready, right? So because of this very active group of investors, I probably get 2 or 3, ask for introductions a week, right? And I've been pretty firm on that. It's rare we open up the network. I would say once a quarter, let's call it, just because they need to be ready as well, right? And it's putting your stake on the line. So, and I also think, just frankly, there's a whole privilege factor here, right? Is that the reason we got this is because I was part of this community. So I'm trying to also pay it forward with the right group, with ideally who doesn't necessarily have the access that, frankly, white guy from Colorado does. So, I think it depends, honestly. In the pay it forward is very important, but it has to be for someone in a team that's really ready. Because that's, I think, been the biggest challenge that we've had, is making introductions when a team or company isn't ready, right? We just wouldn't have been ready in 2016. We were in 2018. And I think we really need to see those 3 years of challenge and readiness before.
So you hinted a little bit about exit plans, future product development. And so where are you at right now? So you have what, 5 products? Is that correct?
Sort of. So we have about 80 SKUs, and amongst the 80 SKUs, it's really 5 product categories,
Gotcha.
right? So it's dish. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So it's dish, hand soap, liquid laundry detergent, all-purpose cleaner, and then auto dish tabs. And then amongst those, we have the glass bottles that are really stunning and that last forever. And then the refills. And those refills come in 2 sizes, 16 ounce and 32 ounce, and then 4 cents each, right? So grapefruit basil, blue sage, sweet honeysuckle, juniper sandalwood. So really beautiful scent profiles.
Those SKUs really add up fast. It's amazing.
That's why when you say it's new products, it's like, I don't know if we're ready just yet.
Yeah. So I guess, are you going to stay within, I mean, and I know I'm trying to jump in the gun here, but there is crossover, I think, into some personal care. So I'm just, hypothesizing here. It seems like a natural fit to sort of go in that direction. Have you thought about that?
I think we have. I think everyone has. I think for us, we just need to do this perfect, and then we want to do everything else well, right? I think brands have the tendency to maybe run before they can walk, and maybe to some extent you should sometimes, but we really want to get distribution everywhere and all things with this category, right? And right now we're at about 5,000 doors, retail stores. That's the lingo for by the end of this year. Next year, let's call it 10, 15, 20,000 doors. And I think we need to see true nationwide distribution and saturation, really good velocities on shelf, really exciting subscriber counts online, and really a community of what is the Cleancult, right? Because that's really our goal, is to build a community here. And then we can grow into new product categories. So yes, but it's just, again, we need to do this really, really well before we think about the next step.
Well, you talk about perfection. I think that's really interesting because it seems like early on, you sort of did not take that perfection stance, and I think it can be really important. It's interesting. There's a really fine balance between just doing it and getting the idea out there and starting versus like hoarding it and waiting too long to then it never happens. But if it's still so imperfect when it's out there, it just, as you've experienced in some ways, doesn't get traction or has a really hard time getting off the ground. And I think there's some bravery in that, and I also think it's just some necessity in it. So
exactly.
So basically, now that you're up and running, you're growing, you're having traction, you're getting in stores, you've perfected the products to a degree. When you say you're trying to perfect it more, is that more on the product side, or is it more on like the distribution and actually logistics side of it?
Yeah, and I like what you said, bravery versus necessity. I do think it's a little bit of both, right? I think for us it's my favorite talk. It's by Scott Belsky, right? It's the messy middle, right? And it's two words, endurance and optimization. And it's just really hit home for us as a team. And it's the main thing that I try to instill in every one of our leaders at all of our teams. And how do we create really a culture of endurance and also optimization, right? Every day. So when we started, we had to ship it, right? Because we needed to satisfy Indiegogo, right? We needed to satisfy Kickstarter. And then when we raised money, we needed to ship it because we had to launch, right? Because we committed to 30, 40, 50, 60 investors that we were launching, right? So it's been a middle ground, again, between those two very different words, but it's been the best path for us, right? Because if we waited any longer, the industry would have caught up to us, and we have a really good lead right now, right? And it was very beneficial that we launched early on, right? But when I say perfection, we take the mindset that we are never perfect, right? How can this formulation be not just a 4.5, but a 4.9, right? How can this glass bottle be refilled quicker and easier? So that's one. It's really taking an aggressive look to, if you look at the best brands out there, or at least the brands that have grown really, really well, let's call it like Allbirds and Bombas, they do have mission-driven stories, but people love their product because their products are phenomenal, right? The shoes are super comfy, and the socks are arguably the best socks in the market, right? I don't know if we're there yet. I think we're close. I don't think we're there yet, right? And again, going back to the first part, if you look at both those brands, they really do prioritize the excellence of the socks and then support it with the donation model or the sustainability sourcing, not the other way around, right? So, our bottles are, in my opinion, the most beautiful in the market today, and they're stunning. I think our refills have the most, basically, frankly, natural ingredient profile in the market today. They work as well as or better than some of the leading naturals and some of the conventionals, but we're still not there, right? So I think one is a formulation and improvement side, and we'll always do that till the, whatever the next step in the brand is. And then two is distribution, right? We need to be a household name online and in retail before we're going to frankly move on to new products. Yeah.
And speaking of that, the evolution to get to a milk carton, it sounds really simple, but I know it's not, and it's part of the processing, and it's having to have the machines to do it. And I think it sounds like other brands have done that as well. They went to their own manufacturing first as one of the first areas of investment. I'm speaking to like Harry's and Warby in their development of their factories first. That seems risky, but very smart long term. And I'm curious, I think this ties into the perfection conversation we're having a little bit, because you really couldn't get this made anywhere else. So you had to go to the drawing board, build your own, have your own machine made, get your investors behind it. What was that process like? How did you arrive there? Was it just enough no's and laws that says you can't do this? You had to do it out of necessity, or was it more of a long-term strategy?
Yeah, that's why I'm probably going to take your two words. I really like it, the necessity and bravery. But it was a little bit of both again, right? It was we did not want to do this ourselves, right? It's, I think, very risky as a consumer brand to take on manufacturing. Yeah. It's not what you should be good at. It's arguably you shouldn't invest in it because it's so resource heavy, and mostly it's not a differentiator, right? So it's what are brands good at? They're good at product development, product improvement, and marketing, right? And branding to some extent. So we really just got enough no's that we had to do it ourselves. And that's why the fundraising was so difficult up front, right? And I still have fond memories. Our first milk cartons, right? Where it was a mock-up that we put macaroni in, because the sourcing company, you put macaroni in, it actually feels really real, right? And it's hard macaroni, obviously not cooked, because it gives it a very similar weight and feel, because you actually can crush it. So at all these investor meetings, they said, "Can I take this home?" And it was like, "No." And then, can I open it? Nope. Yeah, you can't open it. And so I think it was a bit of again, play and show, but also a bit of trying to show the vision. But for us, we had to do it ourselves. There was no alternative, but I would not encourage it as a path.
Yeah. So we're getting close on time, and I always like to use this last section or last question here for you to sort of either give. I mean, you are young. You're in your prime, but what would you give, yourself advice in college? But if you had a chance to speak to yourself when you're at Babson, what would you say?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is the same for everyone, but I think the mindfulness on the journey and the thankfulness is a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Is 5-6 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. It's been quite a while on this journey now, but you don't enjoy it, I think, mostly, and it is obviously a wonderful journey, but there's a lot of frustration, there's a lot of pain, there's a lot of suffering. And it will take a decade. So I think it's really two pieces. It's one, whatever brand, whatever business you're building, it's going to take a decade, right? And if you're not ready for a decade, don't do it. You don't have to be ready for the decade up front, right? Because I thought it was going to take 3 years and then we were going to have a great acquisition, right? And that's not the case. It's not even. So that was probably the biggest piece, is really be ready for the long journey. But it doesn't have to be suffering. And even if it is suffering, how do you just remain as mindful as possible and really enjoy the journey, right? And I think the best entrepreneurs hold both suffering and frustration and like real joy and thankfulness, right? Because yes, it's going to suck, but at the same time, like what a privilege of it being so terrible, right? And you privilege that you have the ability to build a business like this in a country like this, right? So for me, it's time and patience, and then the second is really enjoying it and holding these two kind of counterbalancing emotions at the same time. And I still struggle with that today, right? But every single day I try to start with thankfulness. And I really think it shows in the organization, in the culture. I think it permeates with investors and partners, because I think they sense that trust, they sense that authenticity. So I think those are the two main pieces, and less advice, just more general cultural pillars to start every day with for me.
Yeah, and I talk about this a lot on the show, just because I've pretty much been an entrepreneur my whole life, and as you said, I've had a lot of privilege around just being able to do that, as far as just my education and support system in itself. Just having two supporting parents is huge, and not an advantage that everyone gets to have. But one of the things that I think often get overlooked in the glamorization or romanticism of creating a business and like fulfilling this big quote American dream is it is painful. It is hard. There is frustration. There's tons of anxiety and being unsure. And sometimes I'm like, man, maybe I should just got a job.
Maybe it's not worth it.
Yeah, maybe I should just got a job, and I would have had a 401k and health insurance a long time ago. But in the end, I think ultimately, like, it's not for everyone, and there's nothing wrong. And I was talking to someone recently about this, which is why it's probably fresh in my head. But there's nothing wrong with taking the corporate world and taking those gigs. I think if you can work and survive in that system just isn't right for me, right? Yeah. Do it, because it's a little bit of a path of least resistance. But then again, I personally couldn't operate in a different system where I would just struggle there. So it's sort of also been on, again, going back to it, necessity. It's kind of been like, this is going to be the best option for me. So I think that's some great advice that you spoke to. So thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. I thought it was a great conversation. And hope to keep in touch.
Likewise. Again, thanks so much for having me, and appreciate you having me on the show today.
Great. We'll talk soon.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye.